I am on the site, the battlefield of the Battle of New Orleans. This is a plantation house in the background that the battle was fought on the grounds of. This plantation. The Battle of New Orleans was the last battle of the War of 1812, and there's an argument to be made it should not have happened in the first place. Battle of New Orleans happened on January 8th, 1815. There was some maneuvering in the week before that, so after Christmas, kind of into January of 1815. The Treaty of Ghent, which ended the Battle of New Orleans, ended the War of 1812, sorry, was signed, I don't remember the exact date, but right before Christmas, like the 15th of December, 1814, but word had not made it back to the U.S. yet, and the United States Congress had not ratified the treaty, which means that it wasn't officially in effect yet. Although generally speaking, once a treaty has been kind of shook on, both sides in wars back then usually stood down once they heard that there had been a treaty signed, even though the two Congress and Parliament hadn't ratified it yet. Generally speaking, big battles didn't happen after a treaty was signed. But they didn't know about the treaty yet here in New Orleans. So the British were coming and the Americans were trying to stop them. There is let's see here. I don't know what this is. Let's see. In memory of Major Samuel Spots, who shot the first gun at the Battle of New Orleans, January 8th, 1815, 3rd Regiment, 7th Battery Artillery Corps, born 1788 in Philadelphia, July. Okay, so I guess this is just a monument in memory of the guy who fired the first shot of the Battle of New Orleans. This, I believe, on the other side of this wall is a railroad, and then the Mississippi River is right over here. The way the battle happened is the British were coming from that way. They were coming from the Gulf, and New Orleans is back up this way, and they were trying to capture New Orleans, and the Americans set up on both sides of the river on this plantation. This is the plantation house right here. It doesn't look like it's open. It looks like it's being restored or constructed or something, but the Americans set up defensive fortifications all along this line right here, and then they set up another set on the other side of the river, and the British basically just had at it, and the Americans were firing from behind cover, and the British were marching across this open field right here. This sidewalk supposedly lines up with about where the American fortifications were, and the British just marched across this open field and got their asses handed to them. The general in charge of the British forces was killed, which is not something that happens super often, that your commanding general would be killed in battle, but he was actually shot twice. He was shot once, got back on his horse, got back on a different horse because his horse was killed, and then got shot again and died. But the British basically came at him, trying to drive the Americans out from behind these defensive structures, and the Americans shot the shit out of them, is essentially what happened. It doesn't seem like it was an overly complex sequence of events. It really does just seem like the British tried to come and the Americans shot the shit out of them. We're going to go up these stairs here and see what's on the other side of this. I think that there's a railroad over there, and then the other side of the railroad is the river. But like I said, this battle was kind of fought after the war was over, but it wasn't officially over. So, I mean, in the rules of war, it was perfectly legitimate to have a battle because neither side was aware that the treaty had been signed. It was signed in... Okay, so let's see here. Yeah, that's the Mississippi River right there. Actually, there is no railroad here, just the river. And it looks like maybe there's a dock going out there, and it looks like it might be a working dock, so I'm not going to try and go over there. That's the Mississippi River, so there would have been another American defensive works on the other side of the river. The British had boats, but the boats were too big to get down this section of the river at the time. And the Americans had cannon on the shore, so the Americans could have shot the shit out of the British boats as they sailed by. So they really kind of had to try to dislodge the Americans from this here in order to march on New Orleans. And the big thing about the Battle of New Orleans wasn't even so much the Americans won, because if it had just been the Americans, they probably would have lost. There were not that many Americans. At the time, New Orleans was a very split town. There was the French and Spanish who'd been here for generations and generations. Then there were the Americans who'd been here for maybe 15, 20 years, maybe only one generation since the Louisiana Purchase happened. Because when the Louisiana Purchase happened, New Orleans was mostly French, and then some Spanish. So the Americans came in here and they kind of took over, and the French kind of were like, all right, fuck you, we're going to do our thing and we're not going to really mess with you. And when this British threat happened, Andrew Jackson kind of went to the French and said, hey, look, the British are coming and they're going to fuck you up as much as they're going to fuck us up. Maybe you ought to sign up and, fight with us. And so the French people were kind of like, yeah, we don't care for the Americans, but we dislike the British even more. So we're gonna come out and help. And Jackson also went to the local Native American tribes, mostly the Choctaw Nation was the name of the tribe. And he said, look, we may not be the best of friends, but the British are going to fuck you up. And they said, yeah, okay, we'll sign up. And they even got, the guy's name was John Lafitte, who was a famous, at the time, they call him a privateer. He was a pirate. He went out and hijacked boats. Him and his people went out and hijacked boats out of the swamps. Hijacked treasure boats and hijacked supply boats. And, they were pirates. But he went to him and they said, hey man, can we get some help from you? And actually John Lafitte helped. He didn't personally, it doesn't seem, according to the information center back there, he didn't personally fight in the battle, but he sent a lot of guys and he sent supplies. Apparently most of the flint that the American forces used in their weapons came from pirates. So Andrew Jackson was able to swing a little diplomacy. He rolled a natural 20 on his diplomacy check, and he got all these different groups of people to band together. And we may not like each other all that much, but we like the British even less. So you kind of think a little bit about Andrew Jackson. I do. I mean, as being kind of a little bit of a red ass, especially because he dueled anybody who looked at him funny, and he was kind of a nasty dude. But apparently he was also able to swing people by talking to them from time to time, because he managed to do it here, and it worked out to his benefit, because Andrew Jackson ended up being, I believe, was the 7th president of the United States. Hope I'm not off on not sure. Am I off on some kind of back trail here? Where am I at? What the hell is this? I don't know for sure where I am. I am going to try coming down here. I think I managed to get... This obviously is not part of the battlefield. I don't know what this is. It doesn't look like it's being used anymore, whatever it is, but I think the battlefield is actually down in there. So I kind of got off. I mean, at the time, this was all a battlefield. I mean, obviously there was no building here. There was no fire hydrant. I think this gate's going to lead me back into where the battlefield, the walking path around the battlefield is. But the way this kind of worked is the British were coming this way. The Americans had built up defensive fortifications here. Those trees not anymore so much because it's been drained, because, science and technology. But at the time, where those trees are was mostly swamp. So that wasn't really a thing that they were going to be able to get into and go around the Americans. So they were kind of stuck going over them, trying to go over them. It didn't work. That big obelisk over there in the distance, that is just a monument, a battlefield monument. And I'm not going to probably walk, maybe I will, but I probably won't have the camera on for the entire thing. I'm not going to walk the entire thing. But all through the battlefield are various signs. Let's see what this one says. Fazendeville. John Pierre Fazende, free man of color, grocer of New Orleans, inherited land within the battlefield in 1857. After the Civil War, he divided the land and sold it to newly freed enslaved people from nearby plantations. Over the community grew to more than 200 people. National Park Service acquired the land in 1966. Okay, so just after the Civil War, some of the land where the battlefield was turned into a town for newly freed slaves during the Reconstruction period. Oh, and it says a lot of them moved to the 9th Ward, which ended up getting decimated by Hurricane Katrina. So that's not really what you want either. But yeah, so I'm probably not going to walk the whole trail. It looks like I could probably do it. It is hot out here though. But this whole area here is where the Battle of New Orleans happened. The Americans lost less than 20 guys killed, injured, and captured. Killed, wounded, and captured. British casualties were in the neighborhood of 2,000. I saw one place that said 2,700. I saw one place that said 1,900. But I think that 2,000 is a nice round number of British killed, wounded, and captured, including several, which was somewhat unusual even for the time. It's unheard of now. But even at the time, it was somewhat unusual for as many British officers who died to get killed, including their overall command, a guy named Pakenham. Pakenham packed it in during the Battle of New Orleans. He died on the field, apparently. He wasn't one of those guys who got shot and then died of his wounds 7 days later. He died on the field right there. There was in the visitor center, they were talking about a regiment of Scottish British troops from Scotland who were ordered to march up and support some guys who were trying to put ladders up on the British, up on the, what is this? Is this a, ooh, that looks like that might be, that looks like that, do I have it in my camera view? I can't tell if I have it in my camera view. There it is. That looks like that might be some kind of a Hornet thing or something. I think I'm going to back the fuck off of that. You kind of forget that, you know, I'm not in Chicago anymore. We were at a park called City Park a little bit ago, and we were riding bikes around this lake, and it was just a little piddly lake, if those of us from Oak Lawn, kind of like an Oak Lawn lake kind of thing. It wasn't very long, it wasn't very big. And there were signs all over the thing saying, there are alligators in this lake. Don't go in this lake. There's alligators in this lake. And it's like, oh, right. We're not in the north anymore. Got it. But, what was I? Oh, so the visitor center talked about a battalion of Scottish British troops who were ordered to go forward and support some engineered battalions that were trying to get ladders and, you know, ladders and things up to the earthworks that the Americans had dug, trying to get British troops up and over this earthwork. And they marched forward, and they said they marched right into the range of their own guns, their own artillery. So their own artillery now can't, and actually they got these, I don't know what these things are, but these little holes in the ground with the mud piled up around, they're all over the place. Wonder what animal that is. So they ordered these guys to go up and support the guys with the ladders, and they marched up to right in the range of their own guns. So now their own guns can't really support them because they can't shoot, because they're going to shoot their own guys. And the leader of this battalion of Scotsmen, and this, I mean, this goes a little bit towards how well trained these guys were, but it also seems to me to be kind of stupid. Their battalion leader called a halt, and who knows what his next order was going to be. I'm sure that wasn't the only order he was going to give, but he called a halt and immediately was shot and killed. So whatever his next order was going to be, he didn't give it. And since there was nobody to take his place, or they hadn't decided what was going to happen with that, they just stood there. They just stood there, and the Americans shot the living shit out of them, killed like half of them. And before somebody managed to come forward and give the order to withdraw. And then they withdrew because they now had been ordered to withdraw. The whole concept of just standing there while you're getting the shit shot out of you is just goofy as hell. And the other thing that this place has, I'm going to switch just over there, and I'm going to see if there's a way up here where I can get into it, but just over there is a national cemetery. Don't know where the British soldiers who were killed in this battle were buried, or if they were just buried on the field, or if they hauled them back over and buried them in Canada or somewhere. But the American soldiers, all 10 or 12 of them, whatever it was, that were killed in this battle, we saw their grave yesterday. They are buried in St. Louis Cemetery number 1 in New Orleans. Posted pictures of it on Facebook yesterday. It's a cemetery it's one of those above ground cemeteries, like all the little tombs sitting above ground. You just kind of walk in between them. One of them is a mass tomb for soldiers, American soldiers who were killed in the Battle of New Orleans. So this one says British batteries. So this must have been where the British had their artillery set up. So this right here, this map here shows you a little bit. It shows you the American line. This is into the swamp right here. And then it goes up here and it cuts off into the swamp. So to get around it, you would have had to go through swamps, which isn't a good idea. And then this is the plantation house. This was Andrew Jackson's headquarters. And then there was another group of Americans across the river. And this is where the British had their artillery, their cannons. And they were trying to march across this field and just got the ever-loving shit shot out of them. So, let's see if we can get into this. I bet you it's up by this flagpole up here, probably an entrance into the National Cemetery. Like I said, this battle, I mean, the war was essentially over. The Americans did not do well in the War of 1812. I don't know about anybody else, but it's not really something that I learned about in school. We really didn't cover the War of 1812 all that much. The Americans declared war. There's an argument made they were goaded into it. The British were fighting with the French. The Americans were trying to stay neutral. This was only 25 or 30 years after the end of the Revolution. They were not really interested in another fight with Great Britain, which was still the greatest military power on the planet at the time. But the British kept fucking with us, really. I mean, they would, neutral ships. You're not supposed to fuck with neutral ships. They would stop neutral ships, pull American sailors off. It was called pressing them. They'd press them into service. So make them serve on British warships. And they did that repeatedly, often and repeatedly. They fucked with our trade. They told us we couldn't trade with France, which we're like, we're neutral. We can trade with whatever the hell we want. No, you can't. So, I mean, the United States declared war, but it wasn't, there wasn't much, the British were not giving the United States many options, I guess, as far as whether or not to declare war. So the United States declared war, and it went about as well as you'd expect when you have the greatest military power on the planet at the time, and an upstart country that's only 30 years old. It didn't have much of a standing army, and like a navy of 3 ships. The British kind of beat the Americans' ass most of the War of 1812. They captured Washington, they burned the White House, they sacked the Capitol. There's a famous story about Dolly Madison, the first lady at the time, sneaking a portrait of George Washington out of the White House in her wagon as she evacuated the city ahead of the British troops, who eventually ended up burning the White House down. War of 1812 did not go well for the United States. And basically the Treaty of Ghent didn't really solve the underlying issues. Basically the British said, we're going to stop fucking with you. The United States says we're going to limit our trade with France. I mean, the Treaty of Ghent was kind of all right, we kicked the shit out of you, but we really can't do anything about having kicked the shit out of you. And the part of the British and the United States saying, yeah, you kicked the shit out of us and we can't really kick back right now. And then this battle happened at the end of the war, or after the end of the war, if you want to go with it had been signed. All right, so here's how you get to the National Cemetery. So War of 1812 was kind of a stalemate. I mean, the United States won in that the British did not take us back over, which I think was their primary goal. It was a long shot, but they did not achieve that, so we kind of won in that regard. But I think anytime you get your capital sacked and your president's mansion burned, I think that you can't really call that a win. So let's see. This says the Freedmen's Cemetery. Here lie the remains of ex-slaves. Freedmen's Bureau is established in 1867. Bureau received permission to use 4 acres of the former battlefield as a civilian burial ground. Property reverted to other ownership when the Bureau was discontinued. The cemetery gradually fell into ruins. All above ground traces. Okay, so this was apparently a civilian burial ground. And let's see, Chalmette is the name of the guy who owned the plantation, Mr. Chalmette, at the time of the Battle of New Orleans. So the town is named after him, and the cemetery and the battlefield is named after him because it was his plantation. So let's see, 1910. early land division and more land was incorporated, but calls complete 1875, 1910. So it looks like this 1910 is when the veterans of all major American wars and conflicts are interred here. Of these 15,000, more than 6,700 are unknown. By 1945, all available burial sites were either occupied or reserved, and the cemetery was closed. It was reopened briefly in the 60s for burial of Vietnam veterans. Occasional funeral still occurs for those who have one of the few remaining reserve plots, or for widows of veterans already in the cemetery. So this is not an active national cemetery in that. All right, so Chalmette National Cemetery was established in 1864 for the burial of Union soldiers who died in the Gulf area during the Civil War. Served as a site for reburials of soldiers from battlefield cemeteries in the region. So they put this cemetery up, kind of consolidated any soldiers who were killed into this cemetery. None of the British who died in the Battle of 1812 are buried here. 4 veterans of the War of 1812 are buried in this cemetery. So it isn't like this cemetery is like guys who were killed during the Battle of New Orleans. This happened afterwards, probably just because they had some open land and there was need of a national cemetery in this area of the country. But it is not a active cemetery in that they're not ongoing burials here, except like this, the occasional veteran. I guess there's a few plots that have been reserved here that haven't been filled, and then a few widows. But once those people are gone, I assume this will become an inactive national cemetery. Although I'm sure it's still cared for by the National Park Service. National cemeteries are cared for by I believe the National Park Service and the VA together taking care of national cemeteries. It looks like we have several graves here that are Civil War graves. You can tell from the shield on the stone. Peter Veal was a Civil War veteran from the U.S. Navy. These are all Civil War graves in here. And if the cemetery has been closed since the 40s, with that brief period in the 60s, I bet a lot of the people in here are Civil War veterans. In 1862, in 1864 it was established. So we've got Civil War, Civil War, Civil War. Yeah, almost all of these look like they're Civil War. 4 veterans of the War of 1812. And then we've got Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, and Vietnam are these here. I suspect that almost everybody in here, it looks, just glancing, it looks like most of these tombstones are Civil War. Probably mostly Union soldiers. New Orleans was captured by the Union in 1862, relatively early on in the Civil War. It was kind of a priority, and they captured and held the city for, well, 4 years at the end of the Civil War, from the middle of the Civil War to the end. And the Confederates never managed to take it back, and I imagine that there were probably a decent number of soldiers killed, both in the taking of New Orleans and then in the holding of New Orleans and trying to expand northwards towards Vicksburg. They went from New Orleans north along the river, trying to cut the Confederacy in half, and they managed to do it eventually. It took a hot minute after Grant captured Vicksburg, but they already had, at that point, they already had captured New Orleans. So I suspect a lot of these soldiers probably died during the battle to take New Orleans, and then during the occupation of New Orleans, during and then into the Reconstruction period. I think that's an interesting. Can I read that? I cannot. I don't know who that is. Anyway, let me flip the camera here. Yeah. So that is I'm going to turn the camera off because I don't think there's a whole lot more to see. That is, I dropped my water. That is the Chalmette National Cemetery and the battlefield of the Battle of New Orleans. Pretty important battle in American history, even though it probably should not have been fought. I don't know. The battle, like I said, the two armies were unaware that the war was over, which is kind of, when you think about it, it's kind of a shame. If they had, piddled around getting their plans together for another spider. I got a spider web on my phone. There we go. If we, the armies to spend another couple of weeks piddling around and jockeying for position and maneuvering guys and waiting for reinforcements, then there probably wouldn't have been a Battle of New Orleans. Word came through in February. The battle was January 8th, and I think the Washington, D.C. got notice that this treaty had been agreed to on February 15th, I believe is the date I heard. So like a month and a half. So, okay, 6 weeks. If they'd spent 6 weeks, put it in 6 weeks trying to get, troops in place and get their reinforcements in and whatever else, there may not have been a Battle of New Orleans. But this here, all of this behind me, is the Chalamet National Cemetery. It's actually a really large cemetery. It's very narrow, but it's very long. So it goes all the way back here, and then it goes all the way up there. It's probably a good mile and a half long. Mile and a half, maybe even, probably a mile and a half long. It's not very wide. It's probably only 300-400 feet wide, but it's very long. So anyway, that's the Battle of New Orleans battlefield. It's called the Chalamet battlefield. This is Chalamet National Cemetery, which is a inactive national cemetery. For just glancing at most of these stones, an overwhelming number of these guys are Civil War veterans. Doesn't look like, I see one, looks like that one over there might be a World War I or World War II grave, but almost all of these look like they're Civil War veterans. And all of these ones here, these little stumps, there we go, these little stumps here, those are all unknowns. The sign said there was 15,000 burials here and 6,700 of them are unknown. So those little stumps, I'm assuming, are probably numbered, and they have a number, like somewhere there's a record tied to that number, like maybe where they were found, or where, what division they're from, but they don't actually have a name to put with them. So they don't have a headstone with a name on it. But anyway, Chalamet Battlefield Historic Site. Let me switch this. The location of the Battle of New Orleans, and then this is the Chalamet National Cemetery, an inactive. Yeah, so this is a killed in action Civil War soldier. This whole row looks like they're Civil War soldiers. Yeah. USCT, United States. All of these in this line here say USCT. I don't know what USCT is. United States. Those back there say USCT. Like USN's US Navy, USA is US Army. I don't know what USCT is. Huh. Maybe I'll look that up when I turn the phone off. Turn the camera off. Anyway, Chalamet National Cemetery and the Battle of New Orleans battle site. So, hope everyone has a good day, and yeah, take care. All right, so I've come back around the other side of the battlefield, and I don't know if this is, I can't imagine this is the original, or if this is a recreation, but there's a mound of piled up earth here that I assume that this is where the Americans built their earthworks that they ended up shooting the shit out of the British behind. There is a sign right around this corner that was where General Pakenham, the British commander-in-chief, died. So they said he made it to within 40 yards of the American lines, which is about 40 yards. So it wouldn't surprise me if this isn't the original fortification, which really 250 years later, really, probably not. But if this is a recreation of the American fortification on the line where it was originally at, looks like it extends around down here. I kind of doubt this is the original, but this whole area here was swamp where all these trees are here, and then here's a little fortification. I'm sure this is a recreation, but on this side of the path there's some cannon, and there's some slits dug in the cannon. Actually, it looks like we can get over there, so we'll take a look. But this is probably where the Americans were. So the British were just marching across this open field. If you've ever been to Gettysburg and seen where Pickett's charge happened, the Confederate advancement on Union positions at Gettysburg, I don't know how anybody can be expected to just march across a field like that in the face of guys hiding behind fortifications who are waiting to shoot the shit out of you. How anybody would expect that to be a good plan. It didn't work at Gettysburg, and it didn't work here. And looking at this fortification, and I suspect that the original was probably quite a bit higher and thicker, because the British did try to shoot cannons at this fortification and soften it up and blast some holes in it, and they were unable to. So it gives you an idea how high and how thick this wall of dirt, wall of mud, swamp mud was. I don't know why anybody thought that was a good idea, that was gonna be a success. Let's see what this sign says. Batteries 7 and 8. This is where the American cannon were. So there's a cannon over here. I suspect that this fortification is probably where, at least in the general area, where the American lines were on the day of the battle. And it does go a long way towards explaining why the Americans won and the British lost. Because, man, if you're a British soldier walking across that field, just dump, and there's guys over here behind the dirt shooting at you. Well, of course they're going to shoot the shit out of you. I mean, duh. So we'll go up where this car is parked. Looks like there's a sign there, and then it made a walkway up to the earthworks. But seems like the British here had a poor situation, poor geography. The weather was supposedly pretty cold. The British were low on supplies. This had taken a lot longer than they expected it to take. And the fact that they were low on supplies and kind of cold and wet and damp and unpleasant kind of accelerated the plan maybe a little bit. And it might have made them make some changes to the plan. And, I mean, hindsight's always 20/20. And these are batteries 5 and 6. The center of the American line was not attacked directly. Soldiers here caused many of the British injuries. They just rained cannon fire down these poor schmucks walking up to the line. Hindsight being 20/20, it doesn't seem like a very good plan. And I think the outcome of the battle proved that it wasn't a very good plan. And the Americans took advantage of the fact that it was a bad plan and bad geography and bad weather for the British to absolutely shoot the ever-loving dog shit out of them. Let's see. Please do not climb on the cannon. I will not climb on the cannon, sir. So here we are. We're an American. General Jackson is in that house over there giving orders. The British are over yonder. You know, if you can see it on the phone, I can see it in real life, but there's a British flag flying over there. That's where the British were. And they're just coming. And we're behind here with guns. There's, I believe I read 8,000 British and 7,000 Americans. And the Americans are all just lined up along here by their cannon. The British are coming across this field and getting the ever-loving shit shot out of them. It really does kind of remind you, those of you who've been to Gettysburg and have seen the field where Pickett's Charge happened, it really does remind me of Pickett's Charge. When you're in Gettysburg and you see where Pickett's Charge happened, you're like, what the hell were they thinking? And you have this idea that Robert E. Lee was this ridiculously good general, and he was this military genius and military mastermind, and he gave that order. That goes a long way towards telling me that maybe he wasn't quite the genius, that he gave that order for Pickett's Charge. And the British plan here was a lot of the same, which makes Robert E. Lee did even dumber, because Robert E. Lee should be like, hey man, we're in a similar situation as the British were at the Battle of New Orleans, and that didn't fucking work at all. Maybe we shouldn't do it here at Gettysburg, and they did it anyway. But on the other side of the river, where there was more Americans and more British over here on the other side, the British actually broke through. There were not as many Americans, and there were more British than Americans. They didn't have as good earthworks on the other side of the river. And the British broke through. But the city of New Orleans at the time was on this side of the river. So breaking through on the other side of the river is nice and all, but it's not going to really get you the end goal, which was the city of New Orleans. So even though they broke through on the other side of the river, there really wasn't much they could do with that advantage. Since this side of the river, they did not break through. And actually, not only did they not break through, they got their asses kicked. So the British troops on the other side of the river that did break through ended up having to withdraw anyway. even though they accomplished their half of the goal. Yeah, okay, so that's it. I was walking up to these earthworks. I'm like, oh, okay, this really explains why the British lost this thing and why the Americans won. Because the Americans were just in a position to wait for the British to come out of the cover over there yonder and try and walk across this open field. And at the time, this was probably was most of the plantations around New Orleans at that time, the early 1800s, was sugar. You know, you think of plantations, you think tobacco or cotton. Most of the plantations in the New Orleans area raised sugar cane. So this was probably, I had not looked, but my guess would be this was probably a sugar plantation. So they were walking across this field of, would have been sugar, let's see. No, not in January. It would have been probably just an open, empty field in January, because there wouldn't have been any sugar planted in January. So the British just walked across this open field, and the Americans said, oh, so you're asking us to shoot the ever-loving shit out of you. Okay, that's what we'll do. We'll shoot the shit out of you. And they proceeded to absolutely shoot the shit out of the British. I think the real work Andrew Jackson did was before the battle, when he managed to recruit all these different groups of people who normally didn't really get along all that well to hunker down behind this earthworks and say, hey, let's all put aside our differences, the French and the Americans and the Native Americans and the pirates. Let's all put aside our differences and hunker down behind this earthwork and let's shoot us the shit out of some British. And the pirates and the French and the Native Americans met with Andrew Jackson. You know what? That sounds like a fabulous idea. This is a monument here to all the soldiers who were killed in this battle. All the French and the pirates and the Native Americans also. You know what, General Jackson, that is a fabulous idea. Let's forget about our internal squabbles for a few days here, and let's all shake hands and then go shoot the shit out of some British together. And that's what they did. That's essentially what the Battle of New Orleans was. British came sticking their nose in. Everybody who lived here, who didn't much care for each other, realized that even though they didn't much care for each other, they cared for the British even less. So they got together and they shot the shit out of some British together. So anyway, I am going to turn off the camera now and get in the shade somewhere, because it is about 85 out here right now, and I'm wearing jeans, and it is hot as hell. So, unlike January of 1815, when it was relatively cold. So anyway, hope everyone has a good day.